So, obviously you guys saw the title of the video and clicked on it, so I'm not going to beat around the bush with this one. Hey guys, it's Weaves here. Welcome back to the channel, where today I will try to explain why I think Proctor Ingram from Fallout 4 could very possibly be the Lone Wanderer from Fallout 3. Now, before we get too far into this, I want to establish that this is a theory I have, based on light evidence and conjecture from both games. I will admit up front here that I have no hard evidence of this being the case. Rather, I'll be taking a look at the facts, motives, and behaviors surrounding both characters, and will attempt to present you guys with the connections I see between them. This, of course, means that there will be spoilers for both Fallout 3 and Fallout 4. So if you don't want anything spoiled for you, I recommend you click away now and go enjoy those games for what they are first, then come back if the idea intrigues you. As for everyone else, I imagine, with the games being 12 and 4 years old respectively, that the majority of people clicking on this video are very well versed in the world of Fallout and know enough to be interested in such an assertion. So, let me outline how this is going to go. In order to establish a connection between these two characters, we need to start by examining what we definitively know about each of them. But there's an obvious catch we need to address here, and that's that the two characters here differ drastically in functionality within their respective games. The Lone Wanderer is the main protagonist of a major RPG, which, by nature, means he or she can look and dress however they wish, behave in virtually any way they please, and befriend or antagonize anyone they want. Ingram, on the other hand, is an NPC in a major RPG, complete with her own established appearance, personality, and faction loyalties. Despite this, we do have confirmation in Fallout 4 from various in-game dialogue and terminal entries as to some of the canonical events at the end of Fallout 3. If we have enough information to piece together how the Lone Wanderer resolved the major conflict in the Capital Wasteland, this means we can then attempt to understand why they did it and where those decisions would lead them. Conveniently enough, Proctor Ingram, being an NPC, lacks any real fleshed-out backstory, save a couple of details we'll address later. So this will actually be more of a how the Lone Wanderer became Proctor Ingram type of discussion. Also, for the sake of consistency, I'll be referring to the Lone Wanderer as a she for the remainder of the video, even though the Lone Wanderer could obviously also be a dude. So, without further ado, we'll begin chronologically by discussing what we know about the Lone Wanderer. The Lone Wanderer was born inside the Jefferson Memorial in the Capital Wasteland in the year 2258. We know this because the events of the main game take place in the year 2277, and the Lone Wanderer's canonical age is 19. Her parents were Catherine and James, scientists that were working on an experiment they nicknamed Project Purity, which brought together the Capital Wasteland's greatest minds, one of which being Dr. Madison Lee, in an effort to construct and start up a massive water purifier capable of purifying all the water in the tidal basin. Their work was being overseen and protected by the Brotherhood of Steel. During this time, James became acquainted with one Brotherhood Paladin Cross, who would later come to his aid in traversing the wasteland with a baby in tow. After Catherine died in childbirth, James took his baby girl and, accompanied by Paladin Cross, left Project Purity to find a safer place to raise his child. This is how the Lone Wanderer ends up in Vault 101. Fast forward 19 years, and James suddenly leaves the vault, leaving his young adult daughter behind. His departure caused a ruckus that ended up with the Lone Wanderer being forced to leave the vault and track down her father for answers. After departing Vault 101, the Lone Wanderer follows her father's trail, first through Megaton, where she meets and befriends Moira Brown. Throughout the course of the game, Moira and the Wanderer conduct their own independent field research into a variety of things across the wasteland, eventually culminating in the publishing and wide-scale distribution of the Wasteland Survival Guide. We know the Wanderer saw this through to the end, as we can even find copies of several Wasteland Survival Guide issues 10 years later in the Commonwealth during Fallout 4. This highlights within the Lone Wanderer a potential desire to see the world progress, as well as demonstrating her fortitude and familiarity with scientific research and experimentation. Following her father's trail, the lone wanderer makes a stop at Galaxy News Radio to meet and talk to Three Dog. Interestingly enough, the evidence that this happens at all comes not from GNR or Three Dog himself, but rather from meeting Brotherhood Sentinel Sarah Lyons and her squad, the Lion's Pride. When the lone wanderer later arrives at the Citadel, she's greeted by Sarah and her team with a degree of familiarity, implying they met previously in the ruins surrounding GNR. The lone wanderer eventually arrives in Rivet City and meets Dr. Madison Lee. The nature of their relationship and familiarity admittedly doesn't have much in the way of hard evidence, but it's safe to assume that since they later escape the Enclave's assault on Project Purity and make their way to the Citadel together, that there's at least some degree of respect or understanding between them. Shortly after finding her father, James, in the bowels of Vault 112, the Wanderer returns to Rivet City and aids in getting Project Purity set up again over in the Jefferson Memorial. But before they can finish their work and activate the Purifier proper, the Enclave attacks, and James is killed in the ensuing confrontation. This is important, because it gives the Lone Wanderer great cause to dislike or even hate the Enclave, which leads to her having reason to favor and later side with the Brotherhood of Steel. After escaping into the sewers, the Lone Wanderer leads Dr. Lee and the surviving members of her team to an outlet beneath the Citadel, the Brotherhood's headquarters in the Capital Wasteland. After gaining access to the Citadel, thanks to Dr. Lee's familiarity with the Brotherhood, the Wanderer meets Elder Owen Lyons and begins to learn more about the Brotherhood of Steel. The extent of her relationship with Elder Lyons is a bit unclear. However, one can infer from the cover art of the game that the Lone Wanderer does eventually acquire T-45 power armor and the training to use it from the Brotherhood, which means she at least impressed Lyons enough for him to allow her that privilege. The fact that the Lone Wanderer knew, or was perhaps even proficient in the use of power armor, will of course become important later. The Lone Wanderer is then tasked with locating and retrieving a Garden of Eden creation kit, or GEC for short, from a nearby vault, as she and her new allies will need it to power up the Purifier once they retake it from the Enclave. Her research into finding the GEC is important, because it represents the first of potentially many times she was required to collaborate with scribes Rothschild and Jameson, demonstrating her willingness to work with the Brotherhood toward a larger goal. After finding the GEC and being captured by the Enclave, the Wanderer chooses not to comply with President Eden's request to infect the water in the Purifier with FEV, which would subsequently kill anyone or anything with any sort of radiation exposure or mutation. We know this to be true because in Fallout 4, Deacon mentions in reference to the Capital Wasteland that, quote, "you can actually drink the water there," end quote. And yes, I realize Deacon of all people is not exactly the most reliable source, but considering we do have hard evidence of the railroad operating in the Capital Wasteland, with Victoria Watts in Rivet City, I'm inclined to believe it's possible, likely even, that Deacon has been there and is telling the truth. Usually when Deacon lies, he does so to either protect part of his past or to teach the sole survivor a lesson. Lying about the state of the water in the Capital Wasteland doesn't directly accomplish either of those, so I'm inclined to believe him. The final thing we know for certain about the Lone Wanderer is that she was central to the events of the Broken Steel DLC, in which she officially becomes a Knight of the Brotherhood of Steel and assists the Brotherhood, along with Liberty Prime, in locating and stomping out the remaining Enclave forces in the Capital Wasteland, culminating in the assault on Adams Air Force Base. We know this happened because, during Fallout 4, Paladin Dance tells us about his first squad commander, Paladin Krieg, who was killed at Adams Air Force Base.
Ever ask him why?
I'd considered it, but unfortunately, I never had the chance. After I was promoted to Paladin, and I'd moved on to my own squad, I received word that Krieg was killed at Adams Air Force Base.
Additionally, the extermination of the Enclave is referenced in an entry on Proctor Quinlan's personal terminal aboard the Prydwen. There are also a couple of subtle implications that occur within the last few hours of the game that are worth mentioning. First, it's widely known that Arthur Maxson, who was present as a child during the events of Fallout 3, greatly admired Sarah Lyons and the Lion's Pride. Although interaction between the Lone Wanderer and young Maxon is strictly optional, it is more than likely, with the Wanderer becoming a member of the Lion's Pride and a friend of Sarah, that Maxon also at least knew or possibly even looked up to her too. This is important because, as he later becomes elder, he's of course going to consolidate his resources and probably work closely with the people he admires and trusts the most. And with that, I believe if the Lone Wanderer was still alive once Maxon ascended to elder, he would definitely want to keep her around and use her as much as possible. Second, and perhaps more importantly, the endgame events present the Lone Wanderer with an opportunity for an up-close look at and several active combat missions alongside Liberty Prime. She even witnesses the robot's destruction at the hands of the Enclave's orbital satellite cannon. She has several opportunities to converse with Scribe Rothschild and the other members of his crew about Liberty Prime. There are also many terminals in the Citadel laboratory that discuss Prime's status and catalog his creation. Also, we know from Fallout 4 that Dr. Lee was instrumental in solving Prime's initial power problem and getting him operational. This is all important because it means the Lone Wanderer has established rapport with several of Liberty Prime's original technicians and builders, which means that she, herself, could possibly have taken an interest in and even studied Prime at some point in time. Whew! Okay, that was a lot. But that's what you get when you're talking about a game's main protagonist. Now we switch over to Proctor Ingram, who should be a bit easier to break down. Proctor Ingram is an adult female, in what appears to be her late 20s or early 30s. It's never explicitly stated, but due to her mechanical and power armor expertise, it's safe to assume she is the Commonwealth Chapter's Proctor of the Order of the Shield, which means she's in charge of all the scribes that specialize in mechanical repair, as well as armor research and development. She's also the one Elder Maxon has designated as the project lead for the rebuilding of Liberty Prime. This obviously means she has a very solid understanding of the robot, how he works, what he's capable of, and what she needs to get him back into working order. This all commands a great deal of respect and influence among her brothers and sisters. In addition to her credentials, she has a very defined and pronounced personality, as well as a unique appearance. Her long, shaggy hair suggests she isn't as militant as the rest of the people in the chapter, almost like she didn't grow up as a soldier. She also is one of the few people we meet in the game that can take the Soul Survivor's sarcasm and throw it right back at them. This makes her extremely fun to banter with, but also highlights something deeper about her as a character. It's common psychological knowledge that those who have suffered from trauma in their lives often use humor or sarcasm as a shield or means of deflecting feelings related to that trauma. Which of course brings us to the elephant in the room, the fact that she's permanently bound inside a custom power armor frame that's meant to help her move. It may not be obvious at first glance, but Proctor Ingram actually has a seemingly crippling physical disability. When you first meet her, she mentions being stuck in this rig and not as spry as she used to be, implying she was once a normal individual with free range of motion. If you look closely, you can see between the sockets of her power armor frame that her custom Brotherhood robes end partially down her legs. The Soul Survivor has the option to ask Ingram how she ended up that way, and it requires you to pass a medium difficulty speech check, but if you do, she says the following.
Fighting with the Brotherhood in the Capital Wasteland. Worked at a staging area for the power armor troops. Our position was along a ridge line overlooking the battlefield. I'd say it was a 100-foot drop, give or take.
Who are you fighting?
Super mutants. The damn things had wrangled a couple of behemoths and were marching on our main base of operations. To make a long story short, the ridge I was standing on took a hit from a nuke. Sheared most of the cliff right off, and caused the platform I was standing on to tumble over the side. If I hadn't been test piloting one of the power armor suits at the time, I would have died.
Your power armor helped you survive the fall?
Yeah, it took the brunt of the impact. But I don't know if I'd call it surviving. The suit was trashed after it landed, and I lost both of my legs. Haven't walked since.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there, so let's break it down. First off, that is obvious physical trauma. She endured and survived it, which says a lot about her fortitude and determination. There's also a report from Knight Captain Cade, the division's chief medical officer, on both Lancer Captain Kells and Elder Maxon's terminals, that in summation details, in his professional opinion, that Ingram is more than fit for field duty, and that it would be a waste to bench her. For Maxon to agree with such an assessment, and allow someone with such a seemingly debilitating injury to continue to serve in such an important and active capacity, means he has either immense respect for or desperate need of her. Perhaps a little bit of both. Now, we don't know exactly when this event happened, but we can infer from Ingram's jokes and passive comments about her limited range of motion that it happened long enough ago for her to have started to come to terms with it, but also not long enough ago for her to have fully adapted to her new rig. I would estimate roughly 1 to 2 years, which means she would definitely have been able to have full range of motion during the events of Fallout 3. Now, admittedly, we don't know anything about her time in the Brotherhood before her accident. But if she was present on an active battlefield, working with power armor, it's reasonable to assume she could have been a field scribe. However, I propose that she was more than likely a tech-savvy knight, since later in Fallout 4, during the events of the Spoils of War quest, when you visit Mass Fusion to acquire the beryllium agitator, Ingram can accompany you, and if she does, she more than demonstrates her capabilities with the laser rifle, implying she's had extensive weapons training, the kind only Brotherhood Knights get. One final thing of note about Ingram is her working relationship with Dr. Lee once she's recruited from the Institute. Upon Lee's return to the Brotherhood, she's initially hesitant to work on Liberty Prime, and Ingram sends the sole survivor up to try and convince her. The whole exchange between Lee and the sole survivor always struck me as very brief. Almost too brief. Almost as if Lee had already been mostly convinced by someone else and just needed the sole survivor's push to spring into action. And Ingram does, in fact, admit to having already spoken to Lee when she first arrived.
I've already spoken to her, but she's reluctant to work on Prime for some reason. If you could get her down here to lend a hand with his power system, we can get the big guy moving.
This obviously sets up a somewhat less than friendly dynamic between the two of them that could perhaps be attributed to something as simple as Dr. Lee distrusting the Brotherhood as a whole. But the way they interact does suggest Lee holds a disdain for Ingram in particular.
All right, Doctor.
I hope so. Prime suffered some significant damage to his memory core. I wish your people would have been a bit more careful, Proctor. The good news is that the damage isn't irreversible, and I should be able to get the power flowing into his CPU core without overloading. If your people stay out of my way, that is.
Once you do get Dr. Lee to help, she spends the majority of the rest of the game by Ingram's side, somewhat begrudgingly working from the command center they've established on the tarmac. At one point, during dialogue between Ingram and the sole survivor, the topic of Dr. Lee's somewhat less than sunny disposition is broached, at which point Ingram says the following.
Don't worry about it. We might not be best buddies, but we'll get the job done. Besides, Dr. Lee's worth all the aggravation. We're working with one of Prime's original designers. I don't see it getting any better than that.
This demonstrates that Ingram already knows the extent of Lee's involvement with Liberty Prime 10 years ago, and is more than willing to put up with her to get things done. So that's pretty much all we know for certain about both the Lone Wanderer and Proctor Ingram, as well as some interpretations of mine that highlight the similarities between the two. From a certain point of view, both characters have the option to be seen as strong, intelligent, and capable women who have an affinity for power armor, personal ties to the Brotherhood, and have definitely seen some shit. Another obvious tie is their age similarity. While we don't know Ingram's age for certain, she clearly looks and sounds like she could be in her late 20s, which would line up nicely with the Lone Wanderer, who we know would be 29 during the events of Fallout 4, since the game takes place in 2287. So, now that I've drawn a line between their similarities, for the final part of the video, I'd like to recap by presenting to you all my theoretical timeline of events that connect the Lone Wanderer and Proctor Ingram. Let's see if I can't make you see things a bit differently. In 2258, Catherine Ingram gives birth to a baby girl and dies shortly after. Her husband James travels across the wastes, guarded by his friend Paladin Cross, and eventually negotiates his way into Vault 101. 2258 to 2277. Young Ingram grows up in Vault 101, learning about medicine and science from her father, math and history from her teacher, Mr. Broch, and social interaction from her best friend, Amata. 2277 to 2278. The events of Fallout 3 transpire. Ingram escapes Vault 101, tracks down her dad, completes the Wasteland Survival Guide, meets Dr. Lee, receives power armor training, restarts Project Purity, becomes a Knight of the Brotherhood of Steel, and helps the Brotherhood, along with Liberty Prime, wipe out the Enclave in the Capital Wasteland. 2278 to 2285, the in-between years. Knight Ingram continues to serve with the Brotherhood, refining her combat and technical skills. She takes an interest in power armor research and development. She also continues learning whatever she can about Liberty Prime from Scribe Rothschild, and occasionally goes into the field to do work for him relating to Prime's restoration. During this time, Arthur Maxon is promoted to Elder, and rumors about a technologically advanced group called the Institute start flowing in from the Commonwealth. Maxon dispatches recon teams to see if there's anything of worth in the Commonwealth. 2285 to 2286. Sometime around here, Knight Ingram is battling super mutants in the Capital Wasteland when she is critically injured. She survives and is rehabilitated, but will forever be physically crippled. Elder Maxon, who respects her immensely and still recognizes her value as an engineer and a veteran of the war with the Enclave, promotes her to Proctor of the Order of the Shield. Newly anointed Proctor Ingram is assigned to two very important projects: the christening of the Brotherhood's new flagship, the Prydwen, and the reconstruction of Liberty Prime. 2287 to 2288. Elder Maxon dispatches Recon Squad Gladius, led by Paladin Dance, to the Commonwealth to investigate strange energy readings, and the events of Fallout 4 begin. After the sole survivor emerges from Vault 111 and helps Dance recover the deep-range transmitter from ArcJet Systems, Dance radios his findings back to the Citadel, and Elder Maxon orders Lancer Captain Kells and Proctor Ingram to prepare the Prydwen for immediate departure for the Commonwealth. The Prydwen arrives, and Proctor Ingram directs her scribes to immediately begin the reconstruction of Liberty Prime. But she runs into a CPU and power problem she cannot solve. With Rothschild all the way back in the Capital Wasteland, she can only think of one other person from her past who might be able to help, and requests Maxon to instruct the sole survivor to exfiltrate her old acquaintance, Dr. Lee, from the Institute, so that they may finish Liberty Prime together and see that he is used to bring the Institute to their knees. Ad Victoriam. And that, everyone, is why I think it's entirely plausible that the Lone Wanderer and Proctor Ingram are one and the same. I think it adds several layers of dimension to both characters and makes a compelling story arc for both of them. But that is just my opinion. I'd love to know yours. Do you agree with my theory, or at least think it's possible? Do you have a different theory about the Lone Wanderer's epilogue or Ingram's backstory? Drop a comment down below and let me know. If this video does well, I might consider doing more, as I certainly have a unique theory or two to share. Leave a like and or subscribe if you enjoyed and want to see more. I have an Instagram and Twitter you can follow. Information is in the description. To stay up to date, get memes, and engage with me directly. And I'd love to hear from you guys. But more than anything, I just want to say thanks for stopping by, everyone, and I'll see you all in my next video. Later.